The HOA fined me $50,000 for controlling the water levels on my own lake. This wasn't just some puddle. It was the sanctuary I built with my own two hands, a place of peace for my family. The HOA president stood on my property, smirking, threatening to foreclose on everything I owned. So I walked to the dam, pulled the lever, and I dropped the dam gate. But while they watched the water rise, they had no idea that their panic was part of my plan. They thought they had me cornered, but they were about to find out they never had any power over my lake at all. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if you believe no homeowner should ever be bullied by a power-hungry HOA, hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss them getting what they deserve. The morning air still had a bit of a chill, the kind that feels clean in your lungs. Mist was rising off the lake in lazy gray ribbons, and the only sound was the gentle plink of my daughter Maria's fishing lure hitting the water. She was 14, all legs and quiet concentration, and watching her cast from the dock was one of the few things that could truly settle my mind. I was over by the dam, my hand resting on the cold steel wheel of the sluice gate. It moved a fraction of an inch under my touch, smooth and certain. I'd poured the concrete for this dam myself, welded the gate, and calibrated the outflow down to the gallon. It wasn't just a structure, it was a promise of stability, of a quiet life after years of a not-so-quiet one. This lake was our sanctuary, the place we came to heal after my wife passed. It was my life's work, sitting right there in front of me. "Catch anything yet, kiddo?" I called out, my voice low so I wouldn't spook the fish. She just shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. That was enough. The peace was shattered by the crunch of tires on the gravel road leading to my property. Not one car, but two. A pristine white SUV and a sedan with some generic community safety logo on the side. Doors slammed shut with aggressive finality. I straightened up, my good mood evaporating like the morning mist. 3 figures marched toward me, and leading the charge was Karen Whitman, the president of our homeowners association. She was a woman who wielded a clipboard like a weapon, her face set in a permanent state of disapproval. Flanking her were Louise, her secretary who looked like she practiced her sneer in the mirror, and some beefy guy in a security polo I'd never seen before. Karen didn't bother with a hello. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes scanning my dam with disgust, as if I'd built a monument to bad taste. "Jack Mercer," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We've issued you a final warning. Your unauthorized manipulation of the community water table has to stop. Immediately." I just looked at her, then at the lake, on my land. "Karen, we've been over this. I'm not manipulating a community water table. I'm managing the water level on my own private property to prevent erosion. It's basic engineering." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, we've heard all about your engineering background. It doesn't give you the right to violate Covenant 17B, subsection D. We held an emergency board meeting. You're being fined." She had Louise step forward and shove a thick envelope into my hand. "What is this?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling in my gut. Karen's smile was pure venom. "That is a fine for $50,000, payable within 30 days, for non-compliance and endangering community property." $50,000. The number just hung there in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the morning. It was an impossible, absurd figure. It was designed to break me. I looked over at the dock. Maria had reeled in her line and was watching us, her small frame tense with fear. That's what got the anger started, a slow burn deep in my chest. This wasn't about a covenant. This was about power. "You can't be serious, Karen," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "This is harassment. The fine is completely baseless." She puffed out her chest. "It's all in the bylaws you agreed to when you bought your house, Mr. Mercer. We have the authority. If you refuse to pay, we will put a lien on your property. We will foreclose. You will lose everything." The threat was so blunt, so nakedly aggressive, it almost took my breath away. Her pet security guard took a half step forward, trying to look intimidating. I just met his gaze until he looked away. I turned my attention back to Karen. For a brief, naive moment, I thought maybe I could reason with her. Maybe I could appeal to the board, present my case with diagrams and data, show them that what I was doing was safe and responsible. "Look," I started, trying to keep my voice level. Why don't we just sit down and talk about this? I can walk you through the hydrology. We can find a compromise." Karen's reaction told me everything I needed to know. She looked at me with utter contempt, as if I were a bug she was about to squash. "There is no compromise, Jack. There is only compliance." Then she twisted the knife. "And don't think the community will side with you. We're putting a notice in this month's newsletter, all about your illegal dam and the fines you've accrued. I'm sure your neighbors will be thrilled to know you're single-handedly lowering their property values and creating a flood risk." She was going to shame me publicly, turn the very people I shared a street with against me. She was threatening to burn my whole life down over a few inches of water in a lake she had no claim to. With a final, triumphant smirk, she and her little goon squad turned and marched back to their cars. They drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and the heavy silence of their threats behind. I stood there for a long time, the thick envelope still in my hand. It felt heavier than it should. Maria walked up the grass from the dock, her eyes wide. "Dad? Are we going to lose the lake?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her, at the fear in her eyes that Karen had put there. And then I looked at the dam. My dam. The complex, beautiful machine of steel and concrete I had built to create peace. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The patient craftsman, the reasonable neighbor, he was gone. In his place stood the man who understood that you don't negotiate with bullies who want to take everything from you. You don't appeal to their better nature because they don't have one. You use the tools you have. You use their own arrogance against them. And you build a plan they never see coming. I looked at the water, then at the dam gate, and for the first time, I didn't see it as a tool for peace. I saw it as a weapon, and I was going to use it. The first $50,000 fine wasn't the last. It was just the opening shot. A week later, another envelope arrived in the mail, this one for $10,000, citing continued non-compliance. Then came a $5,000 penalty for an unauthorized structure, which was the small wooden dock Maria fished from. They were just throwing numbers at the wall to see what would stick. The harassment became a part of our daily routine. Every few days, the white SUV would crawl down my road, pausing just long enough for Louise to lean out the window and snap pictures with her phone. They called them inspections. I called it what it was, intimidation. The neighborhood began to change. Conversations would stop when I walked past. People I'd known for years, like Bill Thompson from down the street, would suddenly find something interesting to look at on the ground if I made eye contact. Karen's newsletter had done its job. I was now Jack Mercer, the reckless engineer with the dangerous homemade dam that was going to flood them all in their sleep. It didn't matter that my lake was a good 100 yards downstream from any of their properties. Fear doesn't care about facts. My first instinct was to fight them on their own turf, using their own rulebook. I was a man who believed in process, in order. So I started documenting everything. I set up a camera pointed at the dam, recording a time-stamped video 24/7. I took daily water level readings from 3 different gauges I'd installed, logging them in a waterproof notebook. Every violation, every threatening letter, every drive-by inspection went into a file. My chance to present this evidence came at the next monthly HOA meeting, held in the sterile community clubhouse. I walked in with my binder, feeling prepared. Karen, sitting at the head of the table like a queen on a throne, gave me a smug look as I took a seat. When my turn came to speak, I laid it all out, calm and professional. I showed them, the water level logs proving the stability. I presented the timeline of harassment. I explained in simple terms how managing the water protected the shoreline and the ecosystem. For a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding in a few of the neighbors' eyes, but Karen was ready. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But our experts have reviewed the situation, and they disagree." Her experts? She had no experts. She had Louise, who probably used a Ouija board for her engineering advice. She shut me down, steamrolled my points with procedural nonsense, and the board, a collection of timid yes men, just nodded along. I walked out of that meeting feeling a cold fury. They didn't want facts. They wanted a villain, and they had already chosen me. It was clear that playing by their rules was a losing game. The rules were whatever Karen decided they were on any given day. So I took a different approach. I was going to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that my dam was not only safe, but expertly maintained. I didn't need to hire an expensive firm. I had the skills myself. I conducted a simple 3-part structural check, and I documented every step on video. First, the water gauges. I brought the camera in close to the steel markers I'd driven into the lake bed years ago. I explained how the lines on the markers, correlated with my daily logbook, proved the water level had never fluctuated more than 3 inches, even after heavy rains. There was no surge, no risk. It was stable as a rock. Second, the dam integrity test. I used a small, handheld sonar device, the kind used to check for stress in concrete foundations, and ran it along every inch of the dam's face, above and below the waterline. The readout showed a solid green line. No cracks, no fissures, no weaknesses. I even hit the concrete with a calibration hammer, explaining how the clean, ringing sound meant there were no hollow spots inside. It was perfect. Third, the erosion check. I walked the camera along the banks of the lake and the small creek that fed out from the dam. I pointed out the thick root systems of the willows I'd planted, the solid ground, the lack of any soil washing away. This, I said to the camera, is what a healthy, stable embankment looks like. This dam prevents erosion. It doesn't cause it. I compiled the video and a 1-page summary into a report and had it notarized. I sent a copy to the HOA board via certified mail. This wasn't my opinion anymore. This was hard, verifiable proof. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Karen. Her tone was completely different. It was soft, almost friendly. "Jack," she said, "we received your report. It was very thorough. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. I've been thinking, maybe we can find a middle ground." A wave of relief washed over me. It was so powerful it almost made my knees weak. Maybe this nightmare was finally over. Maybe logic and reason had actually won. She said she'd talk to the board, see about rescinding the fines if I agreed to a formal annual inspection by an engineer of their choosing. It seemed fair. I agreed. That night, I told Maria the good news. I saw the knot of worry in her shoulders loosen for the first time in weeks. "See," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "It's going to be okay." But the next day, another certified letter arrived. This one wasn't from the HOA office. It was from a law firm downtown. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. It was a formal notice. Karen hadn't been negotiating a truce. She'd been buying time while her lawyers drafted this. The letter was cold and brutal. It stated that based on their findings, my dam posed an imminent and catastrophic risk to the community. It said my notarized report was irrelevant. And then came the final paragraph. I had 72 hours to relinquish all control of the dam gate mechanism to an HOA-appointed contractor. If I refused, they would file an emergency injunction and begin foreclosure proceedings on my property for the full, unpaid amount of the fines, plus legal fees. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a declaration of war. They weren't just coming for my lake, they were coming for my home. The 72-hour notice wasn't a piece of paper. It was a ticking clock. For the first day, a heavy silence filled our house. Maria tried to act normal, but I'd see her staring out the window at the lake, her jaw tight. The quiet was worse than yelling. It was the sound of fear settling in. The second night, as I was washing the dishes, she finally broke it. "Dad," she said, her voice small, "Bill Thompson's mom asked my friend if we were moving. She wouldn't look at me. She said you were in big trouble with the HOA. Are we going to lose the lake?" The question hit me like a physical blow. It was one thing for me to fight this, to feel the pressure and the anger. It was another to see that weight on my daughter's shoulders. I knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "No," I said, with more certainty than I felt. "We are not going to lose our home. I promise." It was a promise I had no idea how I was going to keep. The neighborhood had become enemy territory. A trip to the mailbox was an exercise in avoiding eye contact. People who used to wave from their lawns would suddenly get fascinated by a weed they needed to pull. Bill Thompson, the retired firefighter, who I'd shared beers with for years, saw me at the hardware store. He gave me a short, uncomfortable nod and then quickly moved to another aisle. He was a good man, but fear is contagious, and Karen was a master at spreading it. They were all afraid of being her next target, afraid of their own property values, afraid of the lies she was spinning about my catastrophic dam. That isolation was a weapon, and Karen was using it to cut me off and leave me exposed. She wanted me to feel alone. And for a little while, it was working. I felt the walls closing in, the tick of the clock getting louder with every passing hour. I was being squeezed, and surrendering felt like the only way to make it stop. But late that night, sitting in my workshop with the lawyer's letter pinned to the corkboard, something else took over. It wasn't surrender. It was the old training kicking in, the part of my brain that sees a problem not as a roadblock, but as a tactical challenge. They wanted a war, so I was going to give them one. But I wouldn't fight it on their terms. I wasn't an engineer defending his work anymore. I was a veteran gathering intelligence for a counteroffensive. I pulled out my old surveyor's transit and a set of topographical maps of the county. For the next 3 nights after Maria was asleep, I worked under the single dim light of my desk lamp. I wasn't just rechecking my own property lines. I was mapping the entire watershed. I calculated the flow rates from every culvert and drainage ditch in the neighborhood. I measured the exact elevation of Karen's prized rose garden and the manicured front lawn of every board member's house. I was drafting a new kind of blueprint, one that didn't involve building anything. It involved a precise and controlled release of pressure. They wanted to talk about flood risk? Fine. We were going to have a very detailed conversation about flood risk. While I mapped out the physical terrain, I also started digging into their procedural one. I spent hours at the county records office, pulling every document related to the HOA since its founding. I read through pages and pages of bylaws, meeting minutes, and financial disclosures, my eyes burning from the tiny print. It was a mountain of bureaucratic nonsense, but buried in that mountain, I found my first small victory. On a series of fines issued over the last year, for things like mismatched mailbox colors and unapproved garden gnomes, the authorizing signature wasn't Karen's. It was Louise Reynolds. According to the HOA's own charter, only the president or the treasurer could sign off on financial penalties. The secretary had no such authority. Louise had been forging authorization on minor fines, likely at Karen's direction, for months. It was a small crack in their armor, but it was a crack. I sent a polite registered letter to the HOA board, pointing out the discrepancy and gently inquiring if they were aware that their secretary was issuing fraudulent fines. I didn't make a scene, I just planted the seed of doubt. The reaction was immediate. 2 days later, an email went out from Karen to the entire neighborhood, calling a special community safety meeting. She didn't mention my letter, of course. Instead, she doubled down. At the meeting, which I attended and stood silently in the back, she spun a tale of my relentless campaign of harassment against our volunteer board members. She painted me as a bitter, unstable man trying to tear the community apart with frivolous legal tricks to distract from the danger my dam posed. She looked right at me as she said it, her eyes glittering with malice. "Some people," she said to the room of nervous faces, "will do anything to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. But we will not be intimidated. We will protect this community." The room was a sea of grim, fearful faces. They weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at me. I had given them a fact, a procedural error, a small truth, and she had twisted it, using their fear to turn me into the monster. I walked out of that clubhouse feeling more alone than ever, the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on my back. But as I walked home in the dark, I clutched the roll of topographical maps in my hand. They could believe her lies for now. But you can't lie about gravity. You can't lie about the direction water flows. And I was getting very, very close to showing them the truth. The pressure was no longer a distant threat. It was a physical presence in my home. You could feel it in the way Maria would tiptoe around me when I was poring over documents at the kitchen table, the way she'd flinch whenever a car slowed down on our road. The fines had become a running joke in hell. They'd surpassed the price of a new truck and were now approaching the value of the house itself. $75, then $80, then $100,000 after they tacked on penalties for my failure to cooperate and the legal fees their lawyers were gleefully billing. We were bleeding out, and Karen was holding the knife. For the first time, I seriously considered giving up. I sat in my workshop one night, the foreclosure notice staring me down, and I weighed the cost. I could lose the house. Maria could lose her home, the only one she'd ever really known. Was my pride worth that? Was this stubborn need to be right worth her future? I pictured myself walking out to the dam, handing the keys to the gatehouse over to some stranger in a hard hat, and just letting it go. The thought filled me with a hollow, sickening sense of relief. Maybe that was the answer. Just surrender and make the pain stop. That flicker of doubt, that moment of weakness, was exactly what Karen had been waiting for. The final push came at another HOA meeting a week later. I went, not to fight, but mostly to show I hadn't been broken yet, even though I felt like I was crumbling from the inside. The room was packed. Karen was holding court, going on about community standards and the importance of rules. Then she opened the floor for comments, and her eyes found me in the crowd. "Does anyone else have concerns about Mr. Mercer's ongoing violations?" she asked sweetly. A hand went up. It was Tom Gable, a man who lived 3 streets over. I'd helped Tom fix his septic pump last fall. We weren't best friends, but I thought we were friendly. He stood up, avoiding my gaze, and faced the board. "I do, Karen," he said, his voice shaky but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm worried. I mean, we're all supposed to follow the same rules. My wife got a notice because our trash cans were visible from the street. We fixed it. We complied. Some of us don't have fancy engineering degrees to hide behind when we break the rules." A murmur went through the room. He wasn't done. He turned slightly, looking in my direction now. "Frankly, I'm tired of one man holding this entire neighborhood hostage with his ego. This isn't about water levels. It's about a guy who thinks he's above the law." The public humiliation was absolute. It was a perfectly executed betrayal, and Karen drank it in, her face a mask of faux concern. He was saying what she'd been whispering in everyone's ears for weeks. He was their voice, the voice of the frightened mob she had created. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. I just stood up and walked out of the clubhouse, the silence of the room following me out the door. The fight was over. I had lost. The community was against me, the fines were unpayable, and the legal battle would drain what little I had left. They had won. I got home that night and just sat in the dark for a long time. Maria came and sat next to me, not saying anything, just resting her head on my shoulder. All the fight was gone. All that was left was a deep, aching despair. I had failed. I had failed my daughter, failed the promise I made to her mother to always protect this place for them. In the early hours of the morning, unable to sleep, I found myself back in the workshop. I wasn't planning, wasn't fighting, I was just cleaning, organizing paperwork for the inevitable surrender. I picked up the original deed to my property, the thick folded document I'd received 20 years ago. It felt like a relic from another lifetime. Next to it was the pile of legal threats from the HOA's lawyers. On top was a glossy color-printed map they'd included with their last filing. It showed the entire housing development, with property lines marked in neat, black ink. My lot was clearly outlined, and so was the lake. It was labeled Community Drainage Easement 3A. It was their key piece of evidence, their claim to authority. On a whim, I unfolded my old deed. Tucked inside was a copy of the original county plat map from when the land was first subdivided, decades before the HOA even existed. The paper was yellowed and brittle. I spread it out on the table under the light, next to the HOA's shiny new map. And then I saw it. My heart stopped. It was a detail so small, so simple, I'd overlooked it 100 times. The two maps were not the same. On the county's official plat map, the boundary of the subdivision, the legal jurisdiction of the homeowners association, was a solid black line that ran along the old stone wall at the edge of the woods. On the HOA's map, that line had been moved. They had just redrawn it to include the creek and the entire basin that formed my lake. According to the original legally filed document, the HOA's authority ended a full 50 feet before my dam even began. They had no easement, no jurisdiction, no authority. They hadn't just been wrong, they had been trespassing, all along, and I finally had the weapon I needed to burn their entire kingdom to the ground. The feeling of holding that old plat map was like finding a key you didn't know you were missing. The despair of the last few weeks vanished, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. This wasn't going to be a battle of opinions in a stuffy clubhouse anymore. This was going to be a physics demonstration. My plan was simple, precise, and timed to the minute. I spent the morning making a few calls. The first was to the County Water Authority, informing them I'd be conducting a brief high-volume flow test on a private dam for structural and drainage analysis. which was technically true. The second was a non-emergency call to the fire department, giving them a heads up about the same test, ensuring them all water would be contained on my property and pose no risk to public infrastructure. It was about creating a paper trail, about being the only responsible adult in the room before the chaos even started. Maria knew something was different. I just told her I was running an important test and that she should probably stay inside and watch a movie. She saw the look in my eye and just nodded. She trusted me. At exactly 3:15 p.m., when I knew most people would be home from work, but before they settled in for dinner, I walked out to the dam. The air was still and quiet. I took a deep breath, put my hands on the large iron wheel of the main sluice gate, and began to turn. It was heavy, a wheel that was designed to move only with deliberate intention. There was a low groan from the gears, a sound of immense energy being reluctantly released. Then came the sound of water. It wasn't the gentle trickle of the normal outflow, it was a roar. A controlled, focused torrent surged through the gate, pouring into the narrow creek bed I had designed as the dam's primary spillway. It was loud enough that I knew heads would be turning a quarter mile away. The show had begun. I didn't just dump the water randomly, my calculations had been precise. The creek bed, which ran along the edge of my property, followed the exact legal boundary line shown on the old plat map, the real boundary line. The water filled the creek, then spilled over its banks exactly as I had planned, turning the dry, scrubby patch of land between my property and the manicured lawns of the subdivision into a shallow, temporary river. It crept across the ground, a sheet of silver water, until it reached the old stone wall that marked the true edge of the HOA's jurisdiction. And there, it stopped. The water lapped against the stones, perfectly contained, turning the pristine common area just on the other side into waterfront property. The most beautiful part? Karen Whitman's prize-winning rose garden, the one she lorded over everyone, was planted just outside that stone wall. The water pooled around the base of every single one of her precious bushes, swamping them in 6 inches of murky lake water. Within minutes, my neighbors started to emerge from their houses, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. Bill Thompson was the first one to march toward me, his face grim. "Jack, what in the hell are you doing? Are you trying to flood us all out?" He stopped short when he saw the scene. He saw the roaring water, but he also saw that it wasn't coming any further. It had formed a perfect shimmering line right at the stone wall. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood calmly by the dam controls, holding a small stack of papers. "It's okay, Bill," I said. "This is just a demonstration." Other neighbors were gathering now, drawn by the noise. Tom Gable, the man who had publicly shamed me, was there, looking pale. "I'm proving a point," I continued, my voice carrying over the sound of the water. "The HOA has been fining me based on their claim that they have authority over this lake. I'm about to show you all why they're wrong in 3 simple steps." I held up one of the papers. "First, this is a hydrology map I drew myself. It showed me exactly where the water would go. It's not magic, it's just math. You can see for yourselves, it hasn't crossed that stone wall. Your properties were never in any danger." I pointed to the contained flood. "Second, this is a copy of my permit from the county to build this dam 20 years ago. The HOA isn't mentioned anywhere on it because they have no legal standing here." Then I held up the final sheet, the crown jewel. "And third, the most important piece of all, this is the official county plat map from my home's deed. And this," I said, holding up the glossy map Karen's lawyers had been sending me, "is the map the HOA uses. Take a look." I started handing out copies. A low murmur spread through the crowd as they compared the 2 maps. They saw it. They saw the line. They saw the lie. "Their authority," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "Their fines, their foreclosures. It all ends right there at that wall. They've been trespassing on my land and fining me with fraudulent documents for months." Just then, Karen's white SUV screeched to a halt at the end of the road. She and Louise burst out, their faces purple with rage. "Mercer, you're finished!" Karen shrieked, marching toward me. "I'm calling the sheriff. You're going to jail for this. You're reckless. You're endangering everyone." She was playing her greatest hits, but the audience wasn't buying it anymore. They were all holding the maps, looking from the paper to the water to Karen, the gears turning in their heads. She tried to storm past them to get to the dam controls herself. "I'm shutting this down," she yelled. I just put a hand up. I wouldn't touch that if I were you, Karen. This is private property, and my camera is recording. Tampering with my equipment is a felony. She froze, her hand hovering over the wheel. For the first time, she looked uncertain. She was a bully, with no one left to bully. Her power wasn't real, and for the first time, everyone could see it. Her face flushed with humiliation. She spun around to face the silent, watching neighbors. "This isn't over," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting tonight. We'll see who has the authority then." She and Louise retreated to their car and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust and a crowd of very confused, very thoughtful homeowners. They were all still holding my maps. Karen thought she was calling a meeting to regain control, but I knew better. She was calling a meeting to face her execution. The community clubhouse was a powder keg, and Karen Whitman had just lit the match. When I walked in, Bill Thompson was right beside me, a silent, solid presence that spoke louder than words. The room was packed, standing room only. The air was thick with tension, a mix of fear, anger, and the sour smell of stale coffee. Every single person in that room had either seen my demonstration with their own eyes or had a neighbor breathlessly describe the perfect shimmering line of water that stopped exactly where my property ended. They were all holding the copies of the maps I'd handed out, comparing the fraudulent HOA version with the official county plat map. Karen was at the head table, flanked by a pale-looking Louise and the rest of the board members, who looked like they were waiting for a firing squad. She banged her gavel, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. "This emergency meeting is now in session," she announced, her voice tight with forced authority. "We are here to address the reckless and dangerous actions of one individual who has put this entire community at risk." She was trying to frame it, to seize the narrative before it could be taken from her. But it was too late. The story was already out. Before she could continue her speech, a hand went up in the back. It was Bill. He didn't wait to be called on. He just stood up, his old firefighter's frame filling the space. "With all due respect, Karen, I think we've heard enough about risk from you," he said, his voice a low rumble that commanded attention. "I was there this afternoon. I saw what Jack did. And what I saw wasn't reckless. It was the most precise, controlled thing I've ever seen. The only thing he put at risk was your rose bushes. And I, for one, would like to know why your map and the official county map don't match." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. People were nodding, looking down at their own copies of the maps. Karen's face went white. She sputtered, That's out of order. This is not the topic." But the dam of her authority had broken. Another neighbor stood up, then another. "What? About the fines Louise has been signing?" someone called out. "Is that even legal?" The room was turning on her. This wasn't her curated audience of frightened sycophants anymore. It was a room full of people who finally realized they'd been had. I walked to the front of the room and stood at the little podium reserved for resident comments. I didn't have to raise my voice. The room went quiet. I looked at Karen, then at the rest of the board, then at my neighbors. "For months," I began, my voice steady, "I've been told I was a danger to this community. I've been fined over $100,000, and I've been threatened with the foreclosure of my home. And it was all based on a lie." I placed the two maps on the overhead projector so everyone could see them on the big screen behind me. "This," I said, pointing to the official map, "is the truth. It's been on file with the county for 50 years. And this," I pointed to their version, "is a fraud. The HOA has zero legal authority over my lake or my dam. Every fine, every letter, every threat has been illegal." I clicked to the next image. It was a close-up time-stamped photo from my security camera of Karen and her hired goon standing on my property, well past the stone wall, serving me my first notice. "This is called trespassing." I clicked again. It was a copy of one of the fraudulent fines, with Louise's signature clearly visible. "And this is called forgery." Karen shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous. He doctored those maps. Our map was approved by the county when the HOA was formed." She shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. But she had made a fatal mistake. Bill Thompson was already on his phone. He put it on speaker. "Hi, this is Bill Thompson. I'm here with about 50 of my neighbors. We're at a meeting, and our HOA president just claimed the map she's using was approved by the county. Could you check the record for the Pine Ridge HOA's registered plat map?" The woman's voice on the other end was tinny but clear. Certainly. Let me see. Yes, I have it here. The filed boundary for that jurisdiction runs along the old survey line, marked by the stone retaining wall. A collective gasp went through the room. Karen had been caught in a blatant, verifiable lie in front of everyone. She stared at Bill's phone as if it had physically struck her. She looked at Louise for support, but Louise was staring at the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. She was alone. Then a man stood up near the front. It was Tom Gable. He looked ashamed, humbled. He turned to face me. "Jack," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I owe you an apology. I stood in this room and I attacked you. I listened to the fear, not the facts. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." That was it. The last pillar holding up Karen's reign of terror crumbled. People started clapping. Not for me, but for the truth. For the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted off the entire neighborhood. Karen Whitman stood there, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. The room had flipped on her. The public humiliation was total. She grabbed her gavel, her hand trembling. "This meeting is over," she whispered, her voice a hoarse croak. She shoved her papers into a briefcase, knocking over a glass of water. "I resign," she spat, not looking at anyone. "You can all go to hell." She turned and practically ran from the room, Louise scrambling after her. The room erupted in cheers. Neighbors were shaking my hand, clapping me on the back. Bill gave me a grin that was worth more than 1,000 words. We had won. Justice had been served. But as I gathered my papers, I happened to glance out the window. I saw Karen in the parking lot, huddled in the dark by her car. She wasn't crying. She was on her phone, her face illuminated by the screen, speaking with a quiet, venomous intensity. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. I had won the battle, but I had a sudden, sinking feeling that she had just started a new war. My gut feeling in the parking lot was dead on. Karen Whitman wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She was the type to salt the earth so nothing could grow after she was gone. The next morning, a shiny pickup truck I'd never seen before pulled up to the community gate. A man in a clean work shirt got out, carrying a clipboard. He was from a commercial landscaping company, and he had a work order signed by Karen as HOA president and dated 2 days prior to begin emergency erosion mitigation. The order authorized them to dump several tons of large, sharp-edged riprap rocks along the bank of my creek, the one I just flooded. The driver had no idea what was going on. He just had his orders. It was a vicious final act of sabotage. If those rocks were dumped, they would change the water flow, permanently damage my property, and create a legitimate ecological disaster I would be legally responsible for cleaning up. It was her last, underhanded attempt to create the catastrophe she'd always accused me of. Bill Thompson, who had been keeping an eye out, was on the phone with me before the truck even came to a full stop. I was there in 2 minutes. "There's been a mistake," I told the driver calmly. "The person who signed this is no longer with the HOA, and this is private property." The man looked confused, holding his clipboard. "My work order says," he started, but right then a sheriff's car pulled up. Behind the wheel was Sheriff Hank Mallory. He ambled out, looking annoyed. "Getting a lot of calls about this place, Jack," he said, adjusting his belt. "What's the problem now?" From the other direction, Karen's white SUV came speeding up the road. She jumped out, waving a piece of paper. "He's interfering with HOA business, Sheriff. He's trespassing. Here is the emergency order. He's trying to stop us from protecting the community." She was a cornered animal, all fangs and fury. But I was ready for her this time. "Sheriff," I said, holding up my own paperwork. "That woman resigned last night in front of 50 witnesses. She has no authority here. Furthermore, this document she's showing you is an order for work on my private land, which she has no right to alter. It's not an HOA matter." Sheriff Mallory looked back and forth between us, the gears turning slowly. This was now a simple jurisdiction problem, the kind a small-town cop understood. Karen, seeing him hesitate, made her final, fatal mistake. She turned to the truck driver. "Just dump the rocks, now. Do what you're paid to do." The driver looked at the sheriff, who held up a hand. "Nobody's dumping anything until we sort this out." It was that moment of hesitation from the law that finally broke her. I walked over to Sheriff Mallory and quietly handed him a folder. "It's all in there, Sheriff. The fraudulent maps, the forged fines, the official county record of the property line, and time-stamped video of her on my property after being warned. The sheriff opened the folder, and his whole demeanor changed. His face went from bored to very, very serious. Karen must have seen the look in his eyes because a flicker of real panic crossed her face. The bluff was over. "Karen Whitman," the sheriff said, his voice now flat and official. "I think you need to come down to the station with me. We have a few things to talk about concerning fraud and falsifying documents." Karen's jaw dropped. "What? This is an outrage. You can't—" He cut her off. "I can, and I am." 2 days later, the news came out. Karen was facing charges for fraud, forgery, and a few other things the DA's office cooked up. Louise Reynolds, in exchange for her testimony, got off with a lesser charge and was removed from her position. The HOA's house of cards had completely collapsed. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. We held a new election. Bill Thompson was voted in as the new HOA president. His first official act was to draft a resolution, which passed unanimously, that formally voided every fine Karen had ever issued against me and officially recognized the legal boundary of the HOA at the old stone wall. He also instituted a new bylaw requiring a third-party audit of all HOA finances every year to make sure no one could ever use the community's money as a weapon again. The atmosphere changed from one of fear and suspicion to one of relief and cooperation. People started talking to each other again. Tom Gable organized a neighborhood barbecue down by my lake. It felt strange at first, seeing all those people on my property, not as trespassers, but as guests. Maria spent the afternoon teaching kids how to fish from the dock, the same dock Karen had tried to find me for. As the sun set, casting a golden light across the water, Bill clapped me on the shoulder. "You know, Jack," he said, looking at the peaceful scene, "you didn't just save your own place. You saved the whole neighborhood." And for the first time in a long time, looking at my daughter laughing by the water's edge, I felt the truth in those words. This lake wasn't just a sanctuary for my family anymore. It was a testament to the fact that when a community stands together, no bully, no matter how powerful they seem, can ever truly win. The quiet was back, but this time, it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the sound of peace.